Hello everyone. I've got a special one for you guys today, and this one comes from the Telegram group, funnily enough. Someone reached out to me called Tyler who had an interesting story to tell about her experience in the music industry, and I only gleaned a tiny bit of information from what she said. But I reached out to her and said, do you fancy coming on and expounding on this story a bit and giving us a little bit more information about what happened to you and during this time in this music industry, because this sounds to me like an interesting testimony of coming to Christ, basically after witnessing the horrors and the Satanism within a heavily controlled industry. So luckily Tyler agreed, and here she is with me today. We're going to have a conversation here. This isn't a mapped out anything. I don't have a series of questions to ask her in particular. I'm just going to listen to the story that she has to tell, and we're going to organically just let the conversation flow from there. This is something I do want to do more often with some of my subscribers who may have a particular story to tell, so feel free to get in touch with me if you think you have something interesting to say. But for now, I'm going to hand this over to Tyler, and I'm just going to start off by asking Tyler, first of all, thanks for being here, and do you want to just start by explaining where you come from and how you got into all of this? And I'll leave it to you, Tyler.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Paul. I am Tyler Morrison. I am 23, and I grew up wanting to be a singer-songwriter and have success in the music industry, like I think a lot of people dream of. I think it's a pretty common thing that people are attempting to do, especially around my age group. Um, I started writing music when I was 13, and it was really like the focal point of what I did for the next 7 years. I would just spend time at home writing songs, and eventually I got into contact with some producers nearby and started recording music and doing all of this stuff. And I know I never had any idea how it was all going to work out, but I just knew that it was what I wanted to do, and it's what I pursued instead of going to college and everything like that. I just kind of grew up watching different artists impacting people growing up, and it was something that I also wanted to do. Um, yeah, so I moved to Florida after living in Maine my whole life after high school, and I got involved in a music community there. There was definitely much more of a music scene um, in Florida. I had lived in the Fort Myers and Naples area for a while, and it was an exciting experience for me because going from Maine to Florida was definitely a big change, and there was really not too much of a music scene here in Maine at all. And I was very quickly noticed by a lot of the other artists in that area in Florida because there wasn't many female vocalists that were doing very much there. So um, that's how I got kind of started in it. I started making connections and just doing more, and eventually I yeah, just started working with some artists there.
Excellent. So basically, grew up in a
Uh,
small quiet town that led you to obviously have to move somewhere where there's a bit more of a music scene. Is how basically you initially got into this. So how many instruments do you play exactly? What style of music were you playing at this time?
um, at this time, I was really desiring like a pop music career. Like I was very much into Taylor Swift and Lana Del Rey and Lord and Ed Sheeran and people like that. And I just you know, I really wanted to create my own version of it. I grew up playing guitar, piano, and some ukulele, and I had a strong emphasis and desire to write my own songs and to be very much in control of my own career because I had a rough idea that, things could go awry if you did not have control over your own art. So I did have that background and understanding. So that was definitely a strong conviction I had getting into it. Um, And then after I had lived in Florida for 3 years, there were definitely some people in my area that were starting to make, I guess you could say, waves in the music industry themselves. And it was just an exciting time to be there. And I was eventually approached by this investor who had a lot of connections in the music industry. Um, and, he had approached me on Instagram, reached out and said that he was just very much interested in my music and he thought I was really talented. And from there, we ended up just kind of creating like a good work relationship. We started talking more on the phone and stuff, and he told me about all of the things that he would be able to help me with on my path to being a successful singer-songwriter. And I was 19 at the time. I was very young and naive and just had my sights set on being able to do this. And yeah.
No, it's funny. I remember when I was 19, 17, 18, I was in a band as well. And I had similar aspirations. I understand where you're coming from. And, there was moments where we had like people telling us, I really like your music. I'd like to help you get further and come to my recording. So I understand the feeling.
Yeah.
It is kind of a, when you love your craft that much, and your art, and somebody compliments you on it who's in the industry, you can be, I better seize this opportunity sort of attitude, isn't it? So I understand. So tell me more about this person that came to you then. How big was he in terms of in the industry? You don't have to say names or labels if you don't want to, but what was he offering at the time? What was his, how did he approach you? With what kind of words was he kind of angling towards you?
Um, I can't necessarily say like if he had anything to do with like one particular label. He just seemed very, very well connected within the entire music industry. Like he knew producers and A&Rs from all over, but he also just made it known that he was very well connected in general. Like he would just be flexing himself like sideline at NBA games. He would always be backstage at some show. He told me how he was involved in the UN and he would go and he would speak at the UN meetings and he would have dinner with presidents and he would send me pictures of all of his tickets and everything. And he just basically said that he had the resources to make me into whoever I wanted to be. So this was obviously very appealing and, it seemed very much like things were falling into place how I always hoped. Because, there's definitely something to be said for people who um, just kind of go after it and make it happen for themselves. But me being who I was at that time, I wanted to have the experience of being discovered and I guess being brought up by a record label and just to have the feeling of being signed by a big label. So, you know, over time, he just kind of told me that he had like, oh, he had this designer in mind for me, and he had different connections that could just make everything exactly what I want it to be. So eventually, after probably a couple of months of talking on the phone, he had invited me to New York City to meet him in person. And I had gone, it was like right around New Year's, I believe, of turning into 2020. And during that time, I was there for 3 days, I think, and he had brought me to a meeting with an A&R from Atlantic Records. So that was a really cool experience to have somebody sit down from one of the big labels that I knew of that many of my favorite artists were signed to, and to have him actually listen to my music. And after a couple of weeks, he had called me when I was back home in Maine, and he told me that they were having conversations about signing me starting for $1 million, which is just like crazy to hear about. But looking back, there is just, as I got closer to this investor, there's just like a lot of red flags when I was there in New York with him. He was bringing me out, like he was having like all of his connections meet up. I was going out to bars with them, and I was 19. He was buying me drinks and all of this stuff. So at the time, and this is definitely way before I had Christ in my life whatsoever, I didn't really think very much of it. Everything was just going like exactly and better than I had ever hoped. So after a bit of time, when we started to have more conversations about what we were going to do next, like how we were going to start making all of these things happen, uh, he just started to say certain things that I guess in a way raised red flags in my mind, but I was still very young and naive and didn't necessarily view them the way that I should have viewed them. But a couple of the things that he had said that was very, very much contradictory to what I had envisioned for myself was he told me that he wanted me to have a masculine style, and he wanted me to have a girlfriend, and he wanted me to be in like dance lessons with certain choreographers that were just really not like, I had envisioned for myself to just be on stage with a guitar, like singing love songs, nothing crazy. I wanted to have a very classy style, and I had known very young how I wanted to be perceived by people, and I did, have some, I guess, morals that many people don't have in the industry. So, as time went on, these were things that I began to take notice of. And I also noticed that he began to be more critical of my music in general. He was, giving me notes on how I should change all of my music and how my lyrics could be better, or just all this stuff. And it became more clear that he wanted to control me in a way. And this eventually led to him definitely trying to groom me. He was inviting me to go to different places alone with him. And yeah, there was a lot of that, which is something that is kind of like a trope in Hollywood, I would say. You hear a lot of stories like this. So that was my experience up until that point. Um,
Right. No, that was quite a lot to unpack there. Really, I think there's something sleazy, isn't it, about these people in the industry. I mean, one thing I going back to the beginning, what you're saying, that you're saying you were originally in this place, playing your music, getting to know the scene and the people in like the local underground performance areas, and what are the attitudes of a lot of these up and coming artists that you met before they get signed? Are they equally as young and naive? Do they also have these high aspirations and imaginations about them being big and famous? Or are some of them realistic about what that would take? Because it seems like you started to discover slowly what it would actually take to get into those positions that you wanted to be in, And I'm just curious, first of all, what were the attitudes of these other artists who were around you? How did they feel when you got approached, for example, by this person? Was there anything going on there?
I would definitely say in general, and this is something that I noticed in myself too, just looking back at some of the music that I had written. Um, I think that a lot of people felt like they had to fit into a certain box in order to get where they wanted to go. A lot of the people that were around me were just, writing a lot of things in their songs that just kind of go with the trope of how Hollywood, how do I say this? Um, I would say Hollywood just wants to, in general, get people to be involved in, debauchery and just all of this bad behavior in general. And I would say that everybody that I was around kind of was making music in the same way and in their own ways. Like I said, when I was looking back at some of the music that I had released, and I even ended up feeling that I should take some of it down, I was definitely trying to be somebody I wasn't. And, I think that that's part of what they do to make sure that you are, I guess, in the right headspace for them to be able to control you. Like, they want to know that you don't have morals for yourself and that you don't have your own convictions about things, and you're basically willing to do whatever for fame or money or whatever it is, which I think is the draw for so many people, and definitely lots of the people that I was friends with at that time too. And I can say that there was one individual in the Naples area, and he was he's actually somebody that they are building up to be definitely big in the industry right now. And it was interesting to watch his journey because I could see like all of the things that I shouldn't say his name. My investor was telling me to do. Um, and I saw this individual doing these things to get to like I can't say A-list, but up there in the world of fame. Um, so I would say in general, they just like in order to make it there, you have to I guess sell your soul in a way. I didn't not believe in it, but I never really understood what it was. Um, so yeah, that's what I would say that.
Right, yeah. So I guess a lot of people do go there probably with knowing what they're going to have to do, and are probably, like you said, you when you were being accosted by this person to change the way you do your art, you were more of a, I don't really feel comfortable with changing what I want to do. Like I said, you had these morals, but I imagine most of these people in this industry would have been willing to do whatever was required of them. Most usually, I imagine that was the case. And I imagine those are the ones who do end up getting into those high positions, aren't they? The ones that don't ask questions and
Yeah.
just take all the rewards, I suppose. And so let's start to move the story forward then. What was it exactly that made you start to say no? What things were you discovering and seeing that started to, make you realise this was all a bit of a dark con in a way?
Um, well, obviously I started to feel uncomfortable in certain ways because he was trying to mold me into who he wanted me to be. I Even though I was very set on my dream and goal of making it in the music industry, I did, pay attention to these things. But I would say that, during this time, um, was when COVID had first started happening too, and I was just spending a lot of time at home. And this is kind of when I got into the whole world of conspiracies in general, and I started looking at all of this stuff, and I became aware of certain things that go on in the world, like the child trafficking, and just how dark the world is in general, and also things like MK Ultra was another big eye opener for me. But at the time, I definitely didn't know how to really take these things in. And for some reason, I thought that if I were to have a platform, I would be able to um, be a voice for something important like this and be able to bring attention and draw attention to people who need help that are trafficked and certain things like this. So I basically at the same time, for some reason, began to become interested in this. And so I started posting about just like the child trafficking in general. And my investor began to have problems with it. And I really didn't understand why that would be the case. I just like thought that everybody would want all of this to stop. And it began to draw questions in my mind of if they were involved with it in some way, and if this was kind of something you had to be hush hush about if you wanted to make it to a certain level in the music industry. So eventually I just continued to research all of this stuff, and I definitely went through that period of time where I felt crazy because nobody else was seeing it, and all of the people that were my friends in Florida didn't really latch onto it the way that I did either. So I I ended up asking my investor about it. Asked him about the child trafficking, and he basically told me that it went on in the in Hollywood, and it was something that we couldn't do anything about. And that was definitely a shock to hear that. And I can't remember if it was the same conversation, but eventually I ended up asking him about the MK Ultra programming as well, because I had become familiar with the idea that this is something that, the people in the upper echelons of society will do to control people, to make sure that people don't speak on certain things. And I had noticed myself that, so many of the celebrities in the world have kind of like the same talking points and all of that. And where I was at, I wanted to say completely different things if I was ever given a platform. So eventually I ended up asking my investor about this. And he basically said to me that it does go on, and I would have to undergo the programming, but I would never know when it happened, basically. And he left it at that. And I don't know, it took a while for that to really marinate and set in, but I still felt called to be posting about these things, and I had done that for quite a while. And it got to the point where, he was calling me and he was like, you can't be talking about these things. You can't be posting about them. And I don't know how, like, I could tell that a lot of it was just really a test to see what I was willing to do and what I wasn't willing to do. And it got to the point where he was telling me, and I really understood that he was a part of the problem too, when he told me that there was no difference between good and evil. And I needed to decide if I wanted to be a queen or a serf in this life. And those were definitely some really like scary words to sit with. So it took me a really long time to accept that this was going on, and I just felt called to keep posting about it. And eventually I did get dropped by him, and it was because I was posting about the truth. That wasn't before, he had tried to get me to go to Europe with him for a month and certain things like that. So I do somewhat wonder if I maybe would have gone to like one of these programming facilities if I had kept with him or agreed to go with him somewhere else as well, because I had been exposed to all of this stuff, but he was still interested in using me as an artist for whatever he was trying to accomplish. So, yeah, that's kind of how that ended.
Yeah, well, that was good for you. I'm glad it ended that way and not in another worse possible way. Because MK Ultra as a theory, I mean, I think my audience probably does understand quite a lot about it, and we were discussing it briefly before we started here. But I'm not an expert on it, but like yourself, I know the overarching idea is that through drugs and/or trauma, they will basically split your personality and create a slave out of you with this alter ego that you, as he said to you, wouldn't even know had happened to you, because you would have no recollection of splitting into the alter ego. And there's many reasons for this. I mean, in the music industry, I do think sex slave kittens is the main goal. I do think they use these artists not only to sing songs that forward the Luciferian agenda, but also as basically toys for the elites in a sense. So, you see, you dodged a bullet there, and I do think that offer to get you to come to Europe may have been something a bit more nefarious than what he was trying to make out to be. Definitely.
Right, yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a scary story, and it seems like I said, you just accidentally fell into becoming a conspiracy theorist simultaneously while you were also trying to build this music career. And it seems like one cannot be, you can't have one and the other. You can't serve two masters in that respect, can you? So, in a way, I suppose you got saved, which is wonderful. I mean, I remember when I first discovered all the conspiracy theories. It is one of those, you scream it from the rooftops and try and slap everybody around you awake as quick as possible, because you've discovered all these horrifying things. And I imagine if you were trying to build this music career at the same time, that wouldn't settle well, especially if you were talking to the people who may have been involved. Do you think these people?
Yeah.
Do you think these people did know? Do you think that phrase he said to you, "You can either be a queen or a serf," was kind of a hint and a nod at, "Do you want to rule by my side in a sense? Do you want to be one of the big guys, or do you want to just be on the bottom?" Do you think he was a part of all this?
Yeah, I think he was just trying to intimidate me into thinking that, evil really was the ones in charge, and I had a choice to make to be, I guess, in his words, like something in this life or nothing in this life. But this was definitely before I had Christ. I had, grown up going to Catholic church, but it was never a relationship with God. But I did have these deep-seated convictions that, I wanted to have control over my career, and there were certain things that I wanted to do. And from the get-go, I also just wanted a platform to be able to do good with it also. So hearing these things was definitely really disheartening, and it was just very eye-opening and a scary and unfortunate way, because when you spend like your whole life going after something and having to come to terms with that, it just is the complete opposite. It's definitely a really crazy experience, and for a while I really didn't know how to cope with it, because everything with COVID was going on, and I knew that was just another scheme that was going on basically. And yeah, and for a while, like, I didn't have anybody who really saw it. Thankfully, my family was seeing the same things that I was seeing, but I was also very desperate to try to wake up the people that I was spending time with in Florida that were all chasing after the same thing, because I felt that I was shown these things for a reason, and I didn't know how to go about waking people up. And I had to come to terms with the fact that people can't be woken up until they're really ready to face the truth on their own. Um, so yeah, that was a very it was a crazy experience, and it was even crazier having to find out the truth about the world around us afterward. I would say that very much, my experience, or my brief experience in the music industry, it was just kind of the precursor to understanding so many more things. But really, what it showed me was that evil is real and running rampant, and that it showed me that Jesus Christ, is also real. And I had fallen into many of the ditches along the straight and narrow path, along the way, to Christ. So I'm still very much a baby in Christ, but at the same time, I feel that He brought me through this thing in my life for a reason, and I intend to do good with it, at some point. I am hoping to eventually change directions and start recording music again, and hopefully in such a way that I can help wake people up and help people find Christ. I don't know when I'll be able to do that yet, but it's definitely what I feel called to do now.
Brilliant. Well, there's no better goal, really. And I do think God and Christ has a way of making us experience these things in these dark places, to give us that perspective necessary so we can communicate with those people who are already in it, in their language, in terms they can understand. So it's possible, yeah, that is what God could use you for. It seems like you may have a connection to these people out there who are still chasing that dream. You can say to them, "I was you, I understand," and I think that's what people need to hear before someone starts telling them about God and Christ. I mean, before we get into your testimony a little bit there, just out of curiosity, how big was your following at this time?
Honestly, I didn't have too much of a following. I had a lot of connections that I think could have gotten me somewhere very fast. But I would say, like, I had a few songs that had, 50,000 streams on Spotify or more. I still have a couple of songs up. Ultimately, I ended up taking most of my catalog down because I didn't feel like it represented me very much anymore. But again, I really did not get extremely far in the music industry, and I've always kind of been a little timid and introverted and not necessarily like the quickest to run out there on stage and perform, but I feel like that's another part of the way that God built me to be able to not fall for this scheme of the devil. So yeah, I was definitely very much at the beginning stages of my music career, although I had, been working on it for many years before. But I think it's safe to say that things would have gone pretty fast if I had gone the way that my investor wanted me to, because he was ready to just fly me around the country and get me into any studio I wanted to get into, and start off with a pretty significant record deal. So I am grateful that it didn't go farther than that, because I have no idea what would have happened if it did.
Nothing good, I imagine. Just another curiosity I'd like to ask you about. You said he was trying to get you to change the lyrics to your songs. Can you give us any hints towards the types of changes they were angling for? Like what were they trying to do exactly with that? Was there a particular message they were trying to embed in your music, or were they trying to steer it down a particular ideology or something? Well, what was going on there?
I don't know if I have any specific examples. This happened quite a while ago now, but I think it was more to just kind of make me feel like I needed his help. Like I needed his help with everything. I feel that it wasn't necessarily to the point where they were trying to embed any sort of message into my music, but I feel like he just wanted me to get into a place where I would be comfortable with other people writing my songs, and having other people making all of these decisions for me. So I feel that it was just more him trying to get to kind of break down what confidence I did have in myself and my music, and kind of hand it over to him and just say, okay, like you can just kind of mold me into whatever you want me to be.
Yeah, that does make perfect sense. Yeah. Right, well, let's get into your story about how you eventually got to Christ in all of this. So I suppose this may not necessarily be directly about your journey through the music industry, though I'm sure that gave you a lot of insight, but this may just have more to do with starting to research the truth in general and getting into conspiracy, and I do like hearing people's testimonies of how that journey went. Do you want to tell us that story and what it was like for you when you first started learning these things, and how it led you to understand that Christ is basically the end of it all and the truth?
Yeah, so this whole thing with the music industry was definitely the beginning. After I was dropped and I had to basically come to terms with the fact that, the music industry was evil and what I wanted to be was never going to be a thing. I definitely, my path was not direct to Christ. I spent a lot of time just smoking a lot of weed and doing all of these things that were really just to kind of numb my mind and keep my mind at bay to not really think about these things. I mean, I definitely had a lot of interest in conspiracy, but it was a lot to take on at one time, because like we said, it's so hard to come to terms with the fact that you see all of these things, but the people around you and many who you love can't see the things like the same way that you do. So, I was looking into so many different things, and yeah, I felt more like I was going crazy for a period of time, but I definitely spent a lot of time just trying to numb my mind. And I smoked a lot of weed. I got into LSD and shrooms for a while as well. I didn't do too much of that, but I definitely had at least one scary experience with them, which I know is something that you guys discuss on your channel as well. And then eventually, I got involved in a relationship that I really should have never been in the first place. It was not something from God, but at the same time, I wasn't walking with God at this point either. But I would say what had really first introduced me to a relationship with Christ was going to a Bible study with this person that I was in a relationship with, and it really just started to shift my perspective on how having a relationship with God really is the most beautiful thing that you could have. And it took me a long time to, I guess, break off the connections that I had with this person and people around me, to just kind of get to the point where God wanted me to be, where I was just focused on Him. But eventually, I did get there, and now I have such a deep faith in God because I can see that everything in the world is really meant to distract or deceive and keep you away from the truth and who Jesus is and the freedom that comes with him. And I definitely feel called to just share the freedom and love that can come with Christ. But the enemy is real, and he will try everything in the book to try to get you to not have faith. And yeah, I don't know. That's really kind of what went on with me.
Yeah, well, your story, it sounds similar to many stories I've heard. To be honest, I do ask people in my Telegram group to share their story, and a lot of them do come out of that heavy drug use phase as well. That seems to be a very common one, and I think it's nice that it seems like we've us backdoor Christians, as I call them, the ones that come at it not through growing up in the church, but through obviously having some experience in the world that brings them out of it. I feel like we've made a nice little community online, and we do share our testimonies and stories here in that way, and it is very similar, isn't it? So yeah, that's a good story. It sounds like you got involved with a bit of a narcissistic relationship there towards the end. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would definitely say that I definitely think that was his issue. Um, Definitely wasn't willing to make any changes. And, it was definitely hard for a while because he would tell me that like, the only thing that he did fear was God, but his life didn't reflect that in any way, shape, or form. So for a while, he was definitely kind of like the final boss I had to be in order to get that freedom to be able to focus on Jesus the way I needed to. Because Satan will send anything in your life to try to get you to idolize that thing before Christ, and it can be very, very hard to um, break free from these things. But when you do, then there's just so much love in having a relationship with Jesus.
That's right. That's right. So you say you're working on some new music. Are you going to try and get back into creating more music with this new perspective? Do you think that's something you may consider doing?
Yeah, it's really what I've been spending my time on recently. And for a few years, I really had lost all of my desire to write music in general. I really didn't see a point for a while because I had grown up loving the experience of writing music, and I wanted it to touch people. And realizing what the industry was, I just really I didn't really have that fire in my heart to do it anymore. Um, but since learning about Christ and just learning about the world in general, I do feel kind of a stirring in my heart to create something that I guess wouldn't necessarily be like the standard form of Christian music, but I guess would in a way lead people to God that maybe are still on the outside who don't have that faith in God yet, and just kind of make it in a way that is approachable to people who are still lost. Um, so that's kind of what I'm thinking now. But yeah.
Well, it's good. All this hasn't destroyed your desire to still be creative. I mean, I remember my industry was the art industry, you see. I mean, like I said, I had a stint in the music world, but I was never taking that too seriously. But my degree's in art, painting, drawing, sculpting, things like that. And I always grew up in my teens, believing as long as you have the talent and the skills, you'll get rewarded for it, and that's all it really took. But I grew up and eventually got disillusioned after trying to break into that industry, realizing it's just a bunch of pretentious, circle jerking morons propping each other's crap creations up, saying it's all brilliant when it's really clearly not, and just making up big, long word salad paragraphs describing why this pile of trash in the corner of the room is somehow avant-garde and groundbreaking, And I wasn't willing to play that game, and I realized that's all it was. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And I was heavily disillusioned by that in the end, and I didn't want to play that game, and I haven't drawn or painted in many years, sadly, because of it. Because it is that feeling of, well, what's the point? I mean, it's not an industry I'm going to attempt to try and break into anymore. And I suppose I channeled all my creativity into this channel. And don't get me wrong, I'm a photographer these days, so I do still use my artistic skills for my job, but it's the whole creative industry is an absolute mess. And from what you've just told me, it's just the same in the music industry as well. I think it's all entertainment industry, isn't it? I mean, what's your take and opinion on all these recent artists and musicians these days and what they're doing? Have you seen what Doja Cat's doing lately? Do you have any thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, I really try to not pay attention to what mainstream music is doing anymore. I've really made a point to just not listen in general, because I do think that there is so much power in music in general, and you have to be, God warns us about this in the Bible, because it's just like, I don't know, the way that they write all of their songs and is just terrible, honestly. And it's made to get people to be singing these things themselves, just to just create the separation with God. And I think that you have to, I don't know, I just think it's terrible, honestly. But I see all of what they're doing, and it's really just meant to divide people from God more, and just to make it like a fad, in general. Uh, yeah, that's pretty much what I would say to that.
That's probably the safest takeaway you can give about it, to be honest. I mean, I would say the music industry today is overtly satanic. It's kind of a bit too on the nose. I was talking about this with PJ from Conspiracy Pillar podcast, and he was saying when I was talking with him, don't you miss the days when it was just you were looking for symbols in the background of albums obscurely put in the corner somewhere? But now they're just outright dressing like demons and saying I worship the devil and summon demons and channel them and they make me famous. It's kind of, you should do it too. It's kind of, they're not even hiding it anymore, and I think it's just so garish and ugly and horrible. Like you said, the lyrics to these songs, it's like they didn't write any of this. It's clearly the investors and the handlers have just taken over everything, and they're just reaping the benefits and the rewards, and will just say and do anything. They're basically like modern day prostitutes of the music industry, aren't they? In a way.
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of what they were angling for you to be in a sense. I mean, did you see any overt Satanism during your own little endeavor in the music industry? Anything of the sorts?
No, I can't necessarily say that I saw anything like with my own eyes. I'd heard different stories from people. Like, my ex was into music too, and I had talked to a producer that he knew, and he would make some trips out to LA, and he would always tell me how he had to stay away from like the LA parties, because if you had gotten into the wrong room, basically they would drug you and try to get you filmed like with underage girls or doing homosexual acts or something like that. So, yeah, I didn't see anything myself, but as time went on, I came to realize just how rampant it is, and the different mechanisms that they use in order to get you involved, or I guess in some ways get blackmail on you so you can't open up your mouth. Um, so yeah. One thing I will say though, it just kind of made me laugh when I started listening to your videos and stuff, and you were talking about the Hat Man. My investor always wore like this fedora hat, like wherever he went. So I don't know. It probably doesn't have anything to do with that, but I just thought it was a funny connection.
Well, you know what? I have come to the belief through my own understandings that what you wear is actually incredibly serious if you understand the occult. And clothing is a tool to occultists. It's not simply just a bit of a fashion icon or choice, you know. So maybe he was channeling the demon of the Hat Man. And I have theorized the Hat Man is kind of like a contractor, lawyerish type businessman of the underworld, you know, and that
Yeah.
sounds like what your agent was trying to be there, you know what I mean? Trying to get you to sign on the dotted line,
Yeah.
your soul away. So I'm not surprised that he was channeling the Hat Man, you know, because it seems to be some
Yeah.
kind of legalistic demon of the sorts who deals with all the contracts. So it's funny you should say that. It is. Right. Well, I think we've been talking for almost an hour now. So I think it's probably best we start wrapping this up. Do you have any final thoughts or advice you want to give to anybody who's considering going into the music industry?
Um, I would just say that it really is not what you think it is in any way, shape, or form. And, it's not to say that you can't have your own successful music career. It's just that I would not get involved with these people who can kind of make you something overnight. It's just not worth it. They will eventually just make you sell your soul whether you want to or not, and it's really just it's just not worth it. It's not worth it at all. And I think that people who do get involved do end up working for Satan eventually. It's really just what I see. And even that person that I was kind of around, like acquainted with, when I was living in Florida, I see him doing like all of these, like he's headlining all of these music festivals now. He was on like this massive TV show. And I can just see him doing all of the symbolism, and I can see him just adding to the whole evil music scene. So I just don't think that you get anywhere without compromising yourself and your own beliefs. And it's really just not worth your freedom and your connection with Christ, honestly. And that's really what I would say to end this, is just have faith in Jesus, because evil is real, and so is Jesus, and you have to choose whether you're going to be on God's team or Satan's in the end. So just be so careful with what you take in and what you listen to, and yeah, just keep working on that relationship with God is all we can really do to fight this battle effectively, I think.
That's a great message. It basically reminds me of the quote from Mark 8:36, where he says, you know, for what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? You know, it's like you said, it's not really worth it, is it? The benefits and the gains do not outweigh the spiritual cost and even the physical toll on your own mental sanity that this would take as well. Well, thanks for coming on, Tyler, and talking to me and sharing your story. I'm always fascinated to hear these little fringe outlier stories, you know, from people who were almost famous in a sense. You know, we don't hear your guys' stories because you never end up in the spotlight. You know, this is how it always goes. But I bet there are thousands of people just like you who had a backbone and decided to say, no, I'm not going to do that. You know, and if anyone was listening and is inspired by this testimony, reach out to me and please consider sharing your own little insight into these dark world. This is how we expose these people at the end of the day. You know, it's by those who were involved, speaking out about what they've actually seen and experienced. So, Tyler, thanks for coming on. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Paul.
No problem. Thanks for listening, guys, and as always, God bless.